Okay, this is from Isaiah 54, verse 5 through 8. For thy Maker is thy husband. The Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. The God of the whole earth shall he be called. For the Lord hath called thee as a woman forsaken, and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth when thou wast refused, saith thy God. For a small moment have I forsaken thee, but with great mercies will I gather thee. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord, thy Redeemer. This verse, especially where it says, a woman forsaken, I know what that's like to be a woman forsaken. When it talks about a wife of youth, when you were refused, I was a wife of youth that was refused. When I read that verse, it was so personal to me. And God would teach me that he was my husband. The book of Isaiah, it became so important to me and still is, because he would speak to me so intimately through that book, telling me that even though I was forsaken and was refused by others, yet he called me by name. He wrote me on his son's hands, and that he loved me with an everlasting love. I remember one night I was praying, and I heard the Lord speak to me, and I was unsure if it was really him. And he said, "The King is delighted in your beauty." Eric called that night. He was at his apartment. He called to speak to the children. And I told him, I said, I was just told, and I think I told him, I was told by a man, that he was delighted in my beauty. And he totally blew me off, like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I've never been told something like that. He was delighted in my beauty. It was not until a year later I found that Bible verse. It's in Psalms 45, verse 11. I always read the King James. That's just my preference, still is. I happened to be in an old Bible store, and I asked somebody out of the blue if they'd ever heard that verse, "The King is delighted in your beauty," and they told me where it was because it was in a different version. I had never read it before. The Lord was speaking to me and showing me what it was like for him to be my husband, for him to be my first love. He and I started on a relationship that was very different from one that I had with him from before. I remember another night, as Eric was just saying, there was another person involved. And there was one night in particularly, I guess I was going to be holier than thou, because it was not really how I was feeling. And I was talking to the Lord, and I was saying a prayer. Lord, please be with this girl, bless her. And I'm not going to lie to y'all. I was not wanting the Lord to bless her. It was not a real prayer. And it's almost like the Lord was like, when are you going to quit playing with me and be real? And I threw a fit. I mean, I knew the Lord was telling me, when are you going to quit playing with me and be real? And I was stomping my feet, and I was like, okay, you want the real? How dare that you bless her? Strike her dead. David prayed that his enemies would die. Strike her dead. She should pay for this. Am I your daughter? And I threw a fit. And I told him exactly how I felt. And God was like, okay, finally, I can work with you. Finally, You're being real with me. Finally, you're not trying to fake it. And it was almost like I was relieved because I wasn't trying to put up this spirit of religion and holiness. I was being honest with God and telling him really where I was. And he led me to pray and fast. I was reading about Moses fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. And then I saw that Christ did it. And I was like, okay, Lord, until you answer me, I'm not eating. Now, I didn't go into that fast thinking that I was going to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. I was just thinking, I'm not eating until you answer my prayer. And after 40 days, the Lord very softly spoke to me, and I shared this with somebody earlier. He said, will you love me if I don't bring Eric home? And, this had been going on for a while. And I was almost devastated because I thought he was telling me that he wasn't going to bring Eric home. And all this time, because this has been years, he had told me that I needed to pray for this. And I thought he was saying, no, I've changed my mind. And I was like, what? And he was so good when he asked me that. Well, if Eric doesn't come home, will you still love me? And I'm not going to lie to you, I had to really think about that. It's not like I was like, yeah. I was like, are you kidding me? Does that mean he's not coming home? And the Lord did not say anything to me. That question was just there. And I had to really think about that. Will I? Am I serving you just for the loaves and the fish? Am I serving you just to get what I want? Is this about me or is this about you? And I finally had to really pray through that. And I was like, yes, Lord. If Eric doesn't come home, I'm in it for the long haul. The Lord has to be our husband. He has to be first. And we have to determine in our heart, are we serving him for what we can get out? And I had somebody ask me, I thought this was interesting. They said, are we better than our Maker? How did Jesus come? Did he come to be served? Or did he come as a servant? Do we come to church to be fed? Or do we come to feed others? Do we go out into the world to hear the gospel? Or do you go out into the world to preach the gospel? Why are you here? Why are you here? Are you here for yourself? Are you here for the person next to you? This is a question, I know it's tough, but are we asking ourselves these hard questions? Because this whole thing about self, I will be like the Most High, I will ascend, where does that come from? If we are not putting Christ first, and we're not asking ourselves some of these really tough questions, and we're not being honest with God, do we think that we're hiding the truth from him and he can't see? So some of these hard things that God has answered me, I had to be honest with him. And it was not always pretty how I saw myself. But if we're not willing to look at that, then how can we be renewed? How can we be changed? Christ needs to be our husband. He needs to be first, always.